And I think they did that on purpose. It is much harder to forgive them than if I could enter in the imaginative possibility, even if I have to make it up, they didn't know what they were doing. And I think the story invites that kind of question. Maybe they were lost. Well, they shouldn't have been lost. Yeah, and that's probably true, but they were. And I think that really matters in this work that we're doing, right? And thinking through the rite of reconciliation. And to be honest, like a lot of my own burdens that I carry, it's because I won't enter into that space of being lost. Even some of my own biggest mistakes, I say, I shouldn't have done that. I was wrong. I was bad. And to be honest, I didn't do stuff to be evil. My best thinking got me there. This is really, really important. And I don't know if you've had any interaction with AA curriculum at all, but what you say in Alcoholics Anonymous is not like, hey, we messed up, we made a bad calculation. The alcoholic says, my best thinking got me addicted to drugs and alcohol. And that's a little frightening, but when you can get your hands around it, it opens the door for grace. Instead of thinking your way out, right? It opens the possibility of what grace is really about, I think. Now I'm talking like I know it, but I'm really just trying to find that. I think it has to be true. But I'm worried about accepting it. And that's actually what I wanted us to talk about today, because I got some really, really wonderful questions from a couple of people, and I've put them into a document just to help us out as a like a Q&A. And at any point, I want you to please interrupt me and say like, yeah, but what about this? Or I don't know, or whatever. So what I want to do is share my screen with you. And at any point, I want you to please say like, let's stop, or I'm going to try to invite some conversation as we go, if that's okay. But I had some really, in my opinion, great questions. And they're great for me because they're not just pushing my thinking, they're pushing me to think like, why can't I do that? So I think it's always really, really helpful to start out with the Catechism, because that's kind of how we're doing it. I find there's something to be really rich about this, remembering that the Catechism is an outline of faith. It's not a statement of faith. It's an outline, right? So what's it mean to be created in the image of God? It means we're free to make choices and love and create and live in harmony. And when we live apart from that, right, that's really kind of getting us into the definition of sin that we're talking about, living apart from that. Here's the first question. This is a great one. Why is forgiveness so hard? And here's my thoughtful answer on it. Because I think it means we have to give up. I think it means something in us has to die, and we're absolutely afraid of our own mortality. And I think the other thing is, if we're so afraid that if we let one of these things go, we'll have to let go of everything. And that's just too daunting, right? I mean, you can say like, hey, I'd like to change some of my worldview, but to change all of it's really, really hard. And I don't know if you've heard this story that Jesus tells about new wineskins. He says, if you take new wine and pour them into old wineskins, it'll stretch them out and they'll burst. They've already stretched, they can't grow any. What you need is new wineskins for new wine. And look, I mean, I had a clever teacher who described this, I think, as a really fit analogy. It's not like we can take Jesus as a really good idea and plant grace into the way we already think about the world and think we're going to hold it. We have to change the whole way we view the world. That's a tough teaching, but I think it's probably right. And I think it's why forgiveness is so hard, is we're really reticent, or we don't know how to change the whole way we think. So I've had a really good thought about a method to do this, which is to have a funeral. And the Book of Common Prayer has a great funeral. And I'll tell you, having done a bunch of funerals, that a good funeral needs a eulogy. It needs somebody to remind everybody who it is we're handing over to God, even though we don't want to. Right? I mean, most people at a funeral are not, frankly, very excited to give somebody into God's hands, either because they love the person or hated them. And in either case, it is not exciting to hand somebody over into God that you love or hate. And the eulogy is this great reminder of who the person was. And you know, what's funny is like at a figurative level to think, I had some really good plans for my kid. I had some really good plans. And my plans had died. And that's really scary. It is. But a funeral is an opportunity to begin the grieving process and to hand that over to God. And I don't mean in a silly way at all. I don't mean like letting them go. I mean like laying them down inside of God. And I don't know that forgiveness is something that we rush for ourselves or for other people for that reason, because forgiveness asks us to reorient our sense of justice. And I think that's probably why it's so hard. I don't look at people in general who make mistakes and say they just were lost, or they just didn't think that all the way through. I look at people who make mistakes, and I love to use the word should. And the person I use the word should on the most is myself. I don't know if that makes sense, either as a practice or about forgiveness, but I do want to ask the question, why do you think forgiveness is so difficult? Or maybe it is not difficult for you, I don't know.
Explain what you mean when you say you use the word should. You should have known better?
Oh, yeah. You know, again, instead of being lost, it's like you chose that. You were trying to hurt me. You're evil.
Okay.
Or like the self-talk is like, you're such a dummy. You should have known better. You should have been more patient. I can't believe you're so blank, lazy, incompetent, forgetful, uncompassionate, whatever word you need to put in the blank so you can dislike yourself some more.
Well, Mike, I think you get in sort of, I know I struggle with this on that negative hamster wheel where you start these things and it's like you're in here and you can't get off, or you've got this deep rut where you can't see how to get out, and you really are lost because you're stuck in this hole or this wheel or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm harder on myself than I am on other people, and I can be hard on other people.
Yeah, and I wonder, Kathy, if it's really scary, honestly, to admit to ourselves and to the world that we are also lost. And, you know, the other thing I tell kids that I think is interesting, right? You can play hide and seek with small kids, and hide and seek's really fun until you don't think people are looking for you anymore. And, you know, with a little kid, like they might hide and they can't really stand to be hidden that long. Like, you know, like when they're 2 or 3, they'll come out and say, here I am.
Oh, yes.
And I don't know if you remember playing this, like when you're a teenager, sometimes you get in a good hiding spot. And for a while, it's like, yeah, I've got him nailed. But as the time goes on, it starts to be like, is anybody going to find me?
Right.
Are they still looking? And going back to the beginning, like, I wonder if that bit about where hide and seek turns into like, is anybody still looking? Can anybody find me? I wonder if that isn't really a better understanding of hell.
Wow.
Is there difference between making a mistake and a betrayal?
I think maybe, Tim, and I think it probably depends on like how we choose to view it. Now, I'm not, by the way, an advocate of saying like, hey, people make mistakes and they didn't mean to, so there's no accountability. I think actually like starting with grace allows accountability to actually happen. And Brene Brown's done some discussion about this. Like if you call somebody evil, you've let them off the hook actually, because if somebody is inherently evil, how can you punish them for doing something that they are? On the other hand, if you say, no, look, you have fundamental human dignity, therefore you must be held accountable for when you make mistakes because of the damage. But then like, what does that accountability look like? Does it look like getting even, or does it look like trying to go forward and restore communities? So all of this is so wrapped up. And this is what I want to say. I don't know that forgiveness is just it's not just another idea or like another sprocket you can put in the machine. I think this is asking us to rebuild the machine.
Well, I know sometimes I think forgiveness can be really difficult just because, and I'm not entirely sure how this necessarily aligns with scripture, but I feel like often, people are mirrors for us. And so, we do this kind of back and forth between acknowledging suffering and, being really bitter over what we feel like are excuses. And I feel like whenever it's hard for us to forgive other people, it's because, there's something in ourselves that we're not forgiving, that we say when we act like that, it's just an excuse. And so it's hard to acknowledge that maybe suffering in another person led them to that action, and, vice versa. And so often, I feel like most unkindness, derives from suffering. And we kind of get in this back and forth between, well, is this suffering or are those just excuses, when it's really all the same in a way. And yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense, Amber. And I hope actually that diagram about self, God, and other comes to play here, because I do think the scriptural references, Jesus says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I don't think that's just a command. I think that's a description. You cannot love your neighbor more than you love yourself. You cannot.
Mhm. Yeah.
So the things you cannot forgive in yourself, you will not be able to forgive in your neighbor.
And vice versa.
Absolutely. I don't know if any of this makes sense, but there's a lot of us, and I'm wondering about the hardness of forgiveness and your experience with that. Yeah, Susan.
I'm wondering if what the difference is between me forgiving someone or having trouble forgiving someone. And then the other thing is getting someone to forgive you for something that you've done, and they won't forgive you. That puts you in a bad place, because you can't move on until you've been forgiven as well by others.
Well, I'm actually going to disagree with you. I think you cannot move forward with those people until they basically, forgiving you is something they don't give you. It's something they give themselves. And this is where I think it's really, really important.
Okay.
Until they make that move inward, they cannot go forward with you. And I will say it's this interesting thing where, honestly, I often feel like, why can't you forgive me? And what that does, right, is it takes me, I was the perpetrator to begin with. I did something I should not have done. And I'm still the perpetrator. Because they should get over it. And I think realizing, like, when we breach a relationship is actually the same realization I'm slow to make. We're not in control over what they do with us, and to be honest, we never were in control of that to begin with.
So once you have asked for forgiveness and you get to move on.
Well, maybe this is helpful to say, I don't know that we ask for forgiveness. I think our forgiveness is something we give ourselves. And I think the thing we offer other people, honestly, is a heartfelt apology and a hope for reconciliation.
Right.
But we can lay that on the table, and then we have to leave it. That hope is a gift, and that doesn't mean it has to get unwrapped. And we can get really mad at people because they don't open up our gifts, but gifts are given, they're not invested. And that's really hard to keep in mind, because I can come up with a lot of reasons why they should open that gift. But then that's not a gift.
Okay.
I think that's why all of this is really hard. And we've got these great words, but they're so like mixed up. And so I think like, I'm probably overly linguistic, but I think like really spending some time in the language might be helpful as a way of description so we can go forward. And I don't know if you realize this, this is, I think, really fair to tie in the Roman Church, in order to be reconciled, you had to have two things. You had to have contrition and you had to have penance. Contrition meant you had to really feel sorry. Penance meant you had to try to make it right. And if you know about indulgences, right, that was one of the reasons for the Protestant Reformation. Indulgences got rid of the penance, but they did not get rid of the need for contrition. And what's really interesting, and I am sure everybody has had somebody say this to them in an apology, is the way we tend to apologize is really awful. Like, I'm sorry you're mad at me.
Oh dear.
I'm sorry you were hurt by that, but. And of course, you realize the backhanded apology is just further infliction of pain. Or we say, I said I'm sorry. These things happen in my experience, not just in myself, but as a priest, I see these play out more than 92% of the time.
All you have to do is watch two children who have been fighting say, I'm sorry. You know, they don't mean it. They're saying it because they've been told to say it.
Well, I think actually they do that because we've trained them to give terrible apologies. And there's a whole book on apologies I would commend to you by Harriet Lerner. It sounds funny. How can you write a whole book about an apology? But you know, like a real apology is one in which we like enter into the minds and hearts of other people, understand how they might be injured, even if we don't think they should. And we're able to own that we did this thing that has deeply affected them. And we're able to say like, hey, here's what I want to do different. Here's what I want to do better. And you know, why most people don't apologize well is because we don't receive them. Like as a kid, if you apologized, like if you said, Mom, I'm sorry I did that. In general, my experience was Mom would say, yeah, and don't you ever do it again. Instead of your apology really helps.
That's true. That's really true. And when you, I think I grew up as a Catholic, so I did confession, did preparation for confession and First Holy Communion, and wow, when you went to confession, we would go the rest of you, every single Friday, first Friday of the month. We would stand in line, the whole Catholic school, and we would stand in line and two priests would be there and they'd be listening to our confessions. And sometimes the kids would be so loud that 2 or 3 kids down the line could hear what they were saying. I don't know how to verbalize the sense of that, but it was a really cleansing. I believed in it. I believed it. I believed every time, and I've grown up believing God forgives. Whenever I have the right attitude. You're grinning at me. I don't know.
I'm grinning at you because I see Kathy's hand, and you just reminded me of like a really troubling thought I've had that I want to share with the group after Kathy.
What?
I just wanted to say that I went to Catholic schools through 5th, 6th grade, and we had the same experience where you had to line up, and I didn't find it cleansing. I hated it. And the second I didn't have to do it, I did it. And I do believe God forgives, but I just felt the whole situation was so contrived. I wanted no part of it. And I also want to say that I love Harriet Lerner's books. And her book on apologies is very short, but it is very difficult because it really, really makes you think. And one of the major things she says is like, if you've ever read the 5 love languages, about how people experience love or they feel love in different ways. So if your spouse likes little gifts and you spend time together, well, then he or she may not feel loved. You have to find out what their love language is. There's a whole thing, similar thing with apologies. There was like 4 or 5, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in such deep doo-doo. I don't even know where to start. So that might be a good book for book study.
Yeah, it would, I think, be, and maybe holding them together, Kathy, would be something fun we could do after, because Gary Chapman's written the 2 books, the 5 love languages, and then like the book on apologies, and putting them together, I think, gives an interesting frame. Here's a really interesting one, and I hope this isn't too disturbing. If forgiveness is giving up all hope of having had a different past, and if forgiveness is something I really do in myself, isn't it funny that we ask God to forgive us? God,
Will you say
I
that one
want-
more time?
Yeah, yeah. Think about the definition of forgiveness we're working on, right? If forgiveness is a gift I give myself, and if forgiveness is really about settling in to who I am and being grateful for who I am, no matter what has happened. Isn't it funny that we ask God for forgiveness? Here's what I mean. God, I want you to give up all hope of having had a different past with me. God, I want you to accept me like I am.
Well, but isn't it, we're not asking, if you ask God to forgive you, I don't think it's asking God to forgive you. I think it's saying, I want to be right again, God.
Yeah, that's reconciliation. God, I want you to be I want to be reconciled with you. But we don't usually ask that. We ask for forgiveness. And I want to put before you, like, maybe the whole point of that prayer is so that we can enter into God's mind as we conceive it and trust that God has already done that so that we can do it. Because let's be honest, if forgiveness is not already happening with God, we're all in big trouble.
Yes.
And the question is whether we choose to accept that God has already made peace with everything. And the great thing about God, right, is that God has chosen to make peace with everything we've done in the past and everything we're already going to like screw up in the future.
Yeah, but you know, God has no time. I mean, he sees everything, and do we just kind of have to adjust to that moment where we get reconciled?
Well, that's kind of what I think, Tim, is that us asking for forgiveness is not because we need to do that so God will do it.
Right.
We need to do that so we can accept the way God already is.
Yeah.
And by the way, if we believe anything other than that, then God is really, really scary. I know that's the right answer. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Because I don't think that's just our invitation with God. I think that's our invitation about sin, shame, guilt, forgiveness, reconciliation, period. And what's so funny, right, is we say, like, I just don't know if God's going to forgive me. I hope you all know. As representative of the church, I'm not wearing my collar today. I should have. Pretend I'm wearing the collar. Let me speak on behalf of the church. God's forgiveness is not up in the air. It's already happened. And we say it. I don't know that everybody even figures out how universalist the Episcopal Church is. The liturgy seems to have this interesting conversation, right? But when we say this on Sunday, we say Jesus was a sacrifice for some of the world. Do you know the words? We say the whole world. And that means if we really buy into our faith, that includes people who don't deserve it. Who doesn't deserve it? Well, it depends who you are. Could be Adolf Hitler, it could be Joseph Stalin, it could be Donald Trump, could be Hillary Clinton, it could be you. Could be your kid. Could be your priest. Now, that's really interesting, isn't it? We don't ask God for reconciliation. We ask God for forgiveness.
Is there a part for a different understanding of penance after reconciliation?
Yeah, so this is a great question about penance, right? And I think it's really important to think through. And I have, and I want to say this, right? I mean, every priest is different. And I know clergy who would think what I'm saying already is like absolutely nuts. And I'm okay with that. Because you know what? Like, I think they probably love their people, and I want to love you all. So I'm going to say something different, perhaps, than other clergy will say, and that's probably good as long as we can all be in the conversation, right? But I think the whole thing of penance is not, God doesn't need your penance. That's what I want to say. God does not need your penance. But we need penance.
When we need penance.
We need it.
Yeah, we need it.
Because penance is our opportunity to show we mean it. And penance is our chance to make things right. And sometimes our penance is not apologizing to somebody, because that would further injure them. And we get to carry that burden of penance, that we are above all to do no more harm. I mean, that's in AA. That's like step number 8. We try to make amends, except when doing so would cause further injury. And it's really interesting to think, is my apology about me, or is it about the other person? And that's why I don't think it's good for us to go around proclaiming to people, oh, I forgive you.
Oh.
But we do that. Sorry.
So what is penance really? I mean, what is reasonable? I mean, obviously apologizing to people when it doesn't cause harm or things like that. But I mean, I guess as somebody, new to this whole structure of, belief, I'm just wondering what that really looks like, that isn't a self-serving dramatization of your contrition.
I think it's really easiest, Amber, to think about goods, right? So if I take something that's yours, I return it to you in the same condition I got it from. But I also realize there's been a breach of trust. And so maybe if it's money, I return it to you with interest. The thing is, I can't undo the injury that came with the stuff. And that's the interesting part, right? Like, no penance gets rid of the moral injury. But I think penance is the acknowledgement, it's the best I think I can do, and I want to do that. Not so that you can accept me, but because I want a future with you. And in that sense, right, like, I think we sometimes approach penance as an investment. Like, hey, I'm going to invest in penance so you'll have to love me. I'm going to invest in penance so that you have to accept me again, because otherwise you're just a jerk. But I do think penance is our gift to somebody else, because if we're really able to enter into the place of being injured, right? If we're able to enter into the way we've affected other people, intentionally or not, right? Penance is an opportunity to try to give them something. And again, I think all of this hinges on the difference between investments and gifts. And I could be really wrong. And I'm really grateful to see Darlene is probably going to straighten me out.
No, I'm not going to straighten you out. I never do that. I had just had another AA thought. The concept of making living amends can be a kind of penance. In that concept involves, okay, if I'm really, really sorry for what I've done, I'm going to change my behavior. That's the living amends part of it. I'm going to learn to act differently. I'm going to learn to speak differently so that I don't hurt you again. Or if we can't do it with that person, so that I don't hurt someone else again. So I like that. Living amends is a way to put it into action, into behavior. I really am so sorry that I am going to change my own behavior.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting, I think, about penance is the other person who you've originally offended may not even know that about you, but in some ways entering into penance, right, is a way of carrying some grace forward. Like, hey, maybe it took me hitting a rock bottom with you to realize this thing about myself, but I'm going to carry that forward, whether you ever see it or not, because that's how I choose to love you.
And it's a way to choose to love ourselves too. This ties into that whole self-forgiveness thing.
Yeah.
I can more easily forgive myself if I don't keep doing that, whatever that is.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think really then the way we enter into that, right, is by really entering into places like empathy and compassion for other people. Because if you knew there were adjustments to your life you could make that would make the people you love accept your love, that you could give them the love that they want, whether you think they should need that or not. See, this is the interesting thing about how shoulds enter the table. Wouldn't it be a joy for you to give somebody you love the love they want? And I'm a stickler for this kind of language because I just did some premarital counseling training like 2 years ago, and it's predicated on this book called, well, Getting the Love You Want. And it goes a little bit like this. It says, I could not find that note. I'm sorry, I thought I had it written down. It says something like, hey, you know, because you love me, this is between two married people, right? Because you love me, I would like to make a behavior change request.
Oh, that's
Do you
tough.
think you could do this or this or this? The person can say, I cannot do any of those things. What could you do?
Wow.
Person says, because I love you, I am willing to do this thing. It's very specific. But you don't say, hey, because you love me, I want you to change your behavior. I want you to swoon over me every time I walk in the door. That's not in my power to do. What can you do? I will express in a card to you once a week what's going on under the surface about how I think about you. Is that a gift you could receive? Nope, I'd rather have flowers. So flowers, once a week. Yes, that would really touch my heart. I would love to give you a gift that would touch your heart. Flowers once a week. Oh, Mike, that sounds really transactional. I don't think it is transactional. It's based on gifts, and when we're giving gifts, right? You want to give a gift, not just that you enjoy, but that somebody's going to enjoy, right? So the question is, what gift would you enjoy? I can't enjoy giving you that gift. Let's find something else. I know that's kooky. My parents did not have that kind of marriage. That's part of why I think it's kooky. I got asked, hey, is forgiveness pretty much just acceptance? And the answer is, I don't think so. I think acceptance, like widely described, is like, hey, I'm okay, you're okay, whatever happens, happens. I think forgiveness is accepting what has happened but it actually changes who we're going to be in the future. And so when I think about those big structural things like racism and sexism, I can accept that it has happened, but I will not accept it continuing to happen. I don't know if that makes sense. That's where I think those two are different. Most people that I respect, like Nelson Mandela and Gandhi and Martin Luther King, they really do push the idea that forgiveness is self-directed. It really has nothing to do with anybody else. And there's this really great story by Edgar Allan Poe. I don't know if you read this. It's called The Alchemist. It's different from Paulo Coelho's book, but in this Edgar Allan Poe story, there's an alchemist, and he's married to like this beautiful woman inside and out, but she's got like a mole. I think it's actually like one of those red birthmarks, like on her cheek. And because he's an alchemist, he wants to perfect his wife. So he works and works and works, and he comes up with this magic formula, and he takes the birthmark off. And as soon as it goes, she flies away to heaven, because now she's completely perfect. And it's an interesting thought, right? That he's got this ostensibly beautiful woman inside and out, and he can't accept what he has. He has to fix it. And it's this really interesting thing. I think that starts to happen in relationships where reconciliation happens. Brene Brown talks about this language, and I think it's really, really helpful. When we really love somebody, we don't love them in spite of their birthmarks, or in spite of their personality, or in spite of their self-destructive tendencies. We love them because of those things.
But I think there's probably a little bit of the alchemist in all of us, though.
Oh, I'm sure it is. And that's why I think this starts to become really, really important, right? Is that if you're able to love that angelic woman even more because of that birthmark, you're able to put up with it. You're able to love even more. That's when we know we're going in the right direction. God, I want you to forgive me for having a birthmark like this. It sounds crazy when I say that, but most of our forgiveness prayers, that's what they amount to. I want you to forgive me for being quick-tempered. Being quick-tempered is like having a birthmark. Being quick-tempered can be a gift to the world. It can be a problem too, but it can be a gift to the world. It's one of those interesting things to think about, right? Like whether or not something is part of who we are, like a birthmark, or whether something's a tragic, hideous flaw. You're going to see this in the writings on Genesis, so I hate to jump ahead, but you know, like in the Bible, covenants aren't made, they're cut. You cannot make a covenant with somebody. You have to cut a covenant. So there's always like animals cut in half. I don't think we should do that, by the way. But I think what's really interesting to think about, right, is that the ways we really cut covenants, like with empathy and compassion, is these little lines start to cut in under our eyes. And these little lines start to cut into our face, right? And now you can get rid of them, like you can put some Botox in there, but hopefully the lines that cut in are these like smile lines, you know? And what's really interesting is to think about like those wrinkles and lines. I mean, they really show consideration. So they ought to be beautiful things instead of things we're worried about, right? Who wants to be around somebody that has no smile creases after 60 years? I mean, wouldn't that be sad? I often find myself thinking, geez, like I wonder if I have resting angry face. I don't know what you call that in men, like resting bastard face. I don't know the answer to that, right? But I wonder if my natural face is like neutral or like displeased, because that would be a sad way to live. And these are things that we bear, I mean, on our bodies. It's really interesting to think about, right? People with really deep smile creases, those are the people you really want to be around, don't you think? Darlene, I think you're on again.
Oh, I didn't mean to be.
Oh, okay, okay.
I just forgot to mute.
I was hoping you were going to say something.
No, thank you.
So part of what I'm saying is I think maybe sometimes we ask for forgiveness, or we want to forgive things that frankly don't need to be forgiven. Okay, another question, right? What about reconciliation in ourselves, right? And how does the rite of reconciliation help two people? And you know, I've got to tell you, the rite of reconciliation as we do it in the church, and I've never done it with two people at the same time. We'd have to make that one up. It'd be pretty cool. I mean, I think that's my job as resident theologian, is try to like make something up like that that's like helpful. But I do think what's really interesting is that our other sacraments, like baptism and marriage, they have this idea, right, that we're going to work for reconciliation before we even know we need to. Like, we commit to that stuff. Will you do everything in your power to raise this person up in Christ? Well, I mean, shoot, they're like 6 months old. Who knows how bad they're going to be? That's a tough commitment to make. But we make that commitment. And we make that commitment in marriage. And, you know, I don't know if it's worth saying, because I'm really weird and you know that. But at my marriage, we read our own vows, and we didn't say I do to anything. We said, I'll always try. And strangely for us, that was much stronger than saying I do. And I think maybe like part of the goal of all of this stuff is like we're doing things that are going to be life-giving, and we do it with God in the room. I don't mean that God isn't in the room. I mean, we're aware of God's presence in the room. And that seems really helpful to think about real reconciliation being lived out, is like we do it with God in the room, or like if it's helpful for you to imagine God's not even in the room, we're doing that inside of God. Well, how do we move there? What's the next question, you know? And if forgiveness is accepting a giving up of all hope of having had a different past, right? If that's what it is, then it seems like the thing we need is gratitude to me. Gratitude for who we are because of our mistakes, not in spite of them. And I know there's this tricky question in my head about that, like, hey, if I'm really grateful about who I am, I'll become lazy because I'm a workaholic. Like, I won't work anymore. No, it'll just transform the work I do. I mean, that's what Brene Brown really offers, right? Is that, yeah, anyway. Part of the workaholic lie is, if I get off the wheel, I won't do anything anymore. So it becomes this self-perpetuating need to do everything. Because people are either good or they're bad. They either have a work ethic like mine or they're lazy. And I can't be one of those lazy people. So Brene Brown talks about this bit about, instead of talking about perfection, let's just talk about being enough. And I think one of the hardest things about being a parent, and my mother-in-law said this really well, is that as a parent, everything you do is wrong. And, she said, everything you do is enough. Well, I don't want to settle for enough, because to be honest, like, I want to be the trophy winning parent, you know, like, I want to be parent of the year. And getting off of that need to, like, it's enough is really, really helpful. And it's one of those ways I think we start to pursue forgiveness is, hey, I now see that if I'd been able to offer my kid this thing, I would really have liked to have given that. But I can't go back in time. And what I did was what I could do. And if I'm really honest, I don't want to do it again. Like it was enough the first time. I'm doing a lot of the talking. I should probably, I want to make sure this is helpful.
Mike, I had a question about your comment that sometimes we ask for forgiveness for things that can't be forgiven. Did I get that right?
I don't remember saying that.
Okay, then I wrote it wrong. Okay.
Well, I think the truth is, Carolyn, like, I don't know that it's our business to be asking for forgiveness. I think it's our business to be working toward reconciliation. And I know reconciliation doesn't happen with forgiveness, but I mean, really, to think about asking somebody for forgiveness is to say, I want you to accept me and what I did and who I am. I just want you to accept that.
But if you ask for forgiveness, it's a step in the direction that you want to go, I think. It's a way to start dialogue. It may not be the best way, but to me, it can work, I think. I don't know, help me out.
Yeah, well, and maybe I'm like doing too many redefinitions, because obviously what you don't want to do when you've hurt somebody is put them through this whole 2.5-hour course that we've been doing about what these words mean. But I do think there is something helpful to say, like, again, to start with this apology, like, I recognize what I did, and is there more? And when you ask that question, you have to be willing to, like, listen. Like, don't ask for don't invite someone to share it if you can't hold it. But that's part of the penance, is to hold even more injury than you thought you could, that you've given to somebody, whether you meant to or not, right? But I think the thing that you don't really want is acceptance from them. You want a future with them.
Yes.
I don't know if you can forgive me. I sure would like a future with you. I'd like an opportunity to show you that understanding what I've done to you, that I have some understanding of that, and I don't want to do that again to myself or somebody else. You know, I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is all too wordy, you know, and I'm too wordy of a person, but I do think part of what is hard for us is, like, the language is hard.
And it doesn't, I think that it doesn't come with one conversation. It's a process that takes a while, and both individuals, and maybe with the help of somebody else, I don't know, that you work through the pieces and are willing to work through them. So it's a very hard process, but so rewarding I think. Help me, Tim.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, Graciela. And I think if I can share a corollary that's been going through my head for about a year now, as I think about my sabbatical that's coming up next year. I've been thinking about this for a couple of years, actually, that sabbatical. When I think about skills I'd like to have, I'm just going to be totally vulnerable here. I wish I could speak Spanish fluently, because I can see that would be really beneficial to some of the things I do. But I'm going to be honest with you. I don't want to learn Spanish. I just want to be able to speak it. And I'm going to be really honest. I would like to be able to forgive everybody and myself, but I don't want to do the work. I just want to be able to do it. If I'm honest.
When I grew up Hispanic. I think you know this, but my grandmothers both said, "En esta casa no se habla inglés." In this house, you speak no English. So if we were at my grandparents' houses, we spoke no English. So that was the rule they had.
Yeah.
And we spoke Spanish. So therefore, I grew up and then later in high school took classes to learn to read and write it. But spoke it fluently and still do.
I appreciate that. And I do think there's this really important thing where like, we want to have the end of the process, but a lot of times we don't think we're going to enjoy the process. We don't want to do it. And that's the conversion I think that we need to try to open ourselves up to. Darlene, I think I saw your hand.
Yes, this time. Going back to Carolyn's question about your statement, I think the statement she was referring to that there was some confusion about was sometimes we ask for forgiveness from people who can't forgive us, rather than that it's not possible to forgive. What we've done is so terrible that it's impossible to forgive. The impossibility of it comes from within that person. They're not at a point yet where they can forgive. They may never be at that point, but where they are in their life is not a point where they can forgive us. And then that leads us back to our own thinking of, I've done the best I can. This is what's enough. I care enough. I feel bad enough. I have asked, I have apologized for my behavior. That's good enough. So I can forgive myself for that previous behavior because I've made living amends. I've gone to them. I've done everything I can.
Yep.
And now it's up to them. So that's when we can give ourselves the forgiveness for our transgressions in the past.
I think that's really helpful, Darlene. And maybe it reminds me that like when I'm holding somebody in my mind's eye before God, which is what we call prayer, right? Maybe the prayer is, I really do hope they can find release from the pain I've caused, whether I'm in the future for them or not. That's a tough prayer. I don't really want to pray that because I want to be able to dictate how I'm going to be in their future. But that kind of release seems to be really based in that ultimate level of compassion and empathy for them. And it's like that Buddhist prayer, right? May you be free from pain.
Yes. And that release comes from the concept that I use in my head to let go of my need to control the past and the present and the future with this person is they've done the best they could. When I'm trying to forgive someone, I try to think, not only are they lost, that concept of being lost, but they're doing the best they did the best they could at the time. And that helps me forgive myself for my transgressions in the past. I did the best I could at the time. I didn't mean to hurt that person. I made those bad decisions, but it was the best decision at the time I could make. And that ties into what is enough.
And thank you. And I'm grateful you mentioned that. So I want to actually put back a really like some cognitive dissonance from that story I told at the beginning, right? So imagine your own life and how impossible this would be and how different it would be. Imagine your child breaks your new flat screen TV for any reason and you find out. And then imagine looking for them, picking them up, telling you how much you love them and giving them an ice cream.
Oh, wow.
And then talking about how you'll make it right.
Yeah.
And a part of me says like, no, they won't learn the right lesson. I think they probably would learn the right lesson. I used to work at a heart hospital and they were these little sweet Catholic nuns. This was right when they decided they weren't going to wear the habits anymore. And all the nuns were chaplains and this was a Catholic hospital, and they had these little sweet prayer cards like Catholics do. They carry around these cards. I love this about Catholics. They carry around like religious propaganda that's great. And this is one of my favorite pieces of religious propaganda ever. It looked like the kind of card my mom likes to buy that's all scripted and has got like flowers on it, you know, like old people cards. And I really want to play this up because the surprise is great. The card said this, and I want you to fill in the blank. There wasn't a blank on the card. God, help me accept the truth about myself, no matter how blank it is. And you tell me what goes in the blank. I mean, like, what's your first thought? God, help me accept the truth about myself, no matter how
bad it is.
How bad it is. Help me accept the truth about myself, no matter how, I would have said hard it is, because that's the saying, right?
Yeah.
Any other words come up to you like in your gut?
I would say rough.
Rough. Amber?
I'd probably say painful.
Yeah.
No.
Difficult.
Difficult.
Mhm.
Yeah, let me tell you what that card said. God, help me accept the truth about myself, no matter how beautiful it is.
Oh, wow.
And that's my favorite piece of religious propaganda I've ever encountered. It blew my mind.
Oh, my gracious.
Yeah, it seems we always think in the negative, not in the
Yeah.
positive.
That is amazing. That
It's-
is amazing.
I've thought about, I forgot about this until today. I've thought, when I first did this, I thought, I need to give out that kind of religious propaganda, you know, because it's like, it's hopeful, you know, like it's actually good news. But I want to suggest to you that that is the cover for the Rite of Reconciliation. Like, that belongs on the front.
That's very powerful, Mike. That's very powerful. So I grew up with reconciliation every Friday and all that stuff. And I never thought it was contrived. I really went in there innocent or sort of believing very much in the process. I just did.
Maybe I'll make that the new St. Thomas birthday card when I run out of the ones I've got. My prayer for your birthday. I mean, really, what a different thought.
I think it's a fabulous idea, and I think we should do it. And I think we should have handfuls at the front desk that we
Yes.
can hand out, take with us after church, and give to other
And
people.
give it to other
Yeah,
people.
I mean, again, as religious propaganda goes, like it's pretty good propaganda. I hope you know I'm using that word very jovially. I mean, what a different testament to be to the world.
I forgot it.
And I think this is part of what we have to wrestle with. If I hugged my kid when they broke the TV, I may not be teaching them shame and guilt for what they did. That's what we wrestle with. And when I think about my own kid, I wish I could hug her when she broke the TV first. And because I wish that, maybe I'll be able to do it. Amber, you had something to say.
Well, this is probably a basic question that other people don't need answered, but I'm just wondering what the purpose of involving like somebody from clergy in reconciliation is. I guess I mean, again, this is speaking from a point of total ignorance of other people's traditions, but
Yeah.
I guess, you know, I was raised that it just had to be this, you know, one-to-one thing with God, and that, you know, when you involve someone else, particularly clergy, it's because you're reconciling yourself with the church, not necessarily God. So I just don't know anything about you know, that the involvement in another person other than, you know, having kind of like somebody who you want maybe to help you hold accountable. So I'm just really ignorant about involving another person.
I think it's even like better than being accountable. I don't have an appointment. Oh, okay, Taylor, I just need a couple more minutes. Sorry, I did have an appointment and I forgot. Hey, here's what I think, Amber. It's not about accountability. I don't think that. I think that's a side benefit. I think that the really, and here's where I'm going to come back to the beauty of it. It's another human being who's going to sit there representing God and listen to you say the things you're most afraid of, and say, as another human being, that God is not afraid of those things.
Yes, absolutely.
And I am positive, Amber, that God does not need that, but I am very positive I need that.
I do.
And what I need is not a human being behind a veil in a booth. I need somebody who's going to make eye contact with me in all of their own imperfections, but is going to sit there. And if we get it wrong, we get it really wrong. But the opportunity for us as clergy people is to listen with compassion and live into a role that is bigger than who we are on behalf of something that is bigger than who we are. And part of what we get to hear, right? Like, again, I keep referencing the AA curriculum because it's thoughtful, right? Is that you're only as sick as your secrets. And sometimes what it takes, right, is a living, breathing human being in front of you to hear the sickest, scariest thing that is in your heart and be able to say, God is not afraid of that. And accountability comes later.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems a very, it seems, yeah, I always hated that idea. Not the idea of accountability, but just that just didn't make a ton of sense to me. But what you're saying does make sense to me.
I think it's grounded in our Protestant need to be efficient. And the one lesson in Scripture is God is not efficient. God will take as long as we need. But I think God hopes that we'll go ahead and do it so we can enjoy it.
Well, listening to Graciela talk about it in such a loving way is very illuminating.
It's really helpful, isn't it? Most Catholic people don't talk about it in a loving way. So I'm glad for that, Graciela. But I will say this about the Roman practice. I am really against the booth. I've toyed with the booth because maybe it would make it easier for people to show up. But I think the thing that matters is somebody making eye contact with you in your own moment of shame and holding you there, not looking away from you.
Yeah.
Because they're not ashamed of you, and God is not ashamed of you either. The eye contact to me matters a lot. Whether you make it with me or not, I need to make it with you. Because God is always asking us to make eye contact.
They are doing away with the booth.
Yeah, the booth
Absolutely.
has been done, the booth has been done away with, Mike. The last time, when I, recent years, when I've done reconciliation, I sat in front of a priest. And it was face to face.
See, here's what I love about the Rite. The last thing I'm going to say about the Rite, and then I'm going to push us to next week. Every time on Sunday morning, we do confession. Right? And that's general. And let me tell you what will never happen on a Sunday morning. The priest will never get up and say, nope, you didn't mean it enough. Try harder. The absolution is guaranteed. And I think when the Rite is structured that way, I don't want to say it takes the risk out, but it allows you to trust. And again, if we mess that up, that's humanity at its worst. And one of the things I love about being like a very outwardly broken and flawed human being who's also a priest is that I get to put on that collar in moments like this and try to get it right. And that is the one great thing about the dual roles of being a person and being a priest. Some people have a hard time with both of those, myself included. But in this instance, it's one of those really good things. Hey, I'm really grateful for your showing up. I can't tell you how much this means to me because I'm really trying to struggle into it. And I'm not an expert at all. And I want to get better at this. So your questions and your thoughts make a big difference in my life. That's what I want to say. So I'll send you the notes that I've got. Please continue to send me questions and comments and answers. And next week, what I had in mind is we would talk a little bit more about the rite and sacraments and get to an idea of like ways that we can actually start to put burdens down. So I've got some practices that Darlene's helped me with as well. And that's what I want us to do a little bit more next week, okay? Thank you, everybody. Grateful for you.
Thank you, Mike.